This show and everything else on Complex Action is made possible by the generous support of our patrons on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/complexaction to learn more. So let's talk about what is exactly in your wheelhouse, which is the story and the setting of Shadowrun.
Sure.
Something that, as you admitted yourself, is really wide and deep and rich, and sometimes really impenetrable. You know, when you're trying to get into it, as I know from experience, because I've always been interested in it, but not any further than just the fluff that's presented, what little is usually presented in each edition's core rulebook, okay? I've never had a lot of time for it, but recently I've decided, like, especially now that I'm doing YouTube stuff for Shadowrun, I'm like, I really want to finally get into it in the way that I've always wanted to. And now that we're 5 editions in, I'm like, holy cow.
You've waited 4 editions too long.
Yeah.
Right. And you say impenetrable. It is, because even the books, you can't just read one book. Everything is so interconnected. They do their best to kind of let things stand alone, but the fact is, you're living in this world that is built upon the layers of everything that came before it.
Yeah.
Half the time, when freelancers go to create content, when the missions guys go to write the new missions, or there's a new adventure log coming out, you have to spend half of your time just making sure that you're not overwriting something that has already been written, or changing something. And the editors have a full-time job just making sure that people aren't changing the lore haphazardly or retconning something on accident. It is impenetrable is a good word, but once you're able to get into it, it is deep and wide and very fulfilling for a fantasy setting.
I can imagine. One of the reasons I really wanted to get into the Shadowrun setting, I've historically in my life have really always been into, and I still play since the beginning, World of Warcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has kept me in that game is how rich Blizzard makes the lore of that game. And I've always kept up with it from the beginning. And that so enriches my experience. And I've decided, and this is what it sounds like you're saying, I've decided that I really want that enriching experience in Shadowrun. So that's
well, the lore is actually one of the things that, if you love it, it will keep you engaged and will keep you liking it, even if you're not actually playing the game at any given moment in your life. You will always have your ear to the ground for Shadowrun news or Shadowrun lore, or even if you're not playing the RPG or a video game, you might pick up a novel because it's just something that you want to keep up with. Sounds like the same thing, with World of Warcraft or even Dragon Age. Like, I just decided once upon a time, like, Dragon Age is going to be a video game that I'm going to do everything.
Right, right.
I read the comics and I, play the video game. So, yeah, same thing. I agree.
So, let me ask you then, because of the fact that Shadowrun is so impenetrable, and you do a podcast which requires you to penetrate the story and the lore and everything, how do you do that? How do you go about researching it and to create those episodes?
The hard way. So at a certain point, I was really afraid that people were going to recognize that I was a fraud and that I actually didn't know as much history as I present Opti to know on the podcast, because clearly that I, as the guy behind Opti, am not this vast repository. I kind of do the podcast, and a lot of it does sink in there, but a lot of it, if you were to ask me like, hey, what happened in 2032, that is not knowledge I can just pull up.
Sure.
I kind of do it in the way that we do in high school, where we kind of cram for a test and then we forget it as soon as the test is over.
Right.
But the stuff that does stick with me is all the research that I do. And again, that's just hard way. It's going through all of the PDFs that I have, going through all the hard books I have, and just looking for keywords, looking for
you just go through
dates,
and Control F so and so.
You know what? And it's not that easy, because up until recently, and people can make fun of me, I didn't even know that you could search multiple PDFs at the same time, and so it
Whoa,
was
whoa, whoa,
just
whoa,
this
whoa! You
painful.
can? I didn't
You
know
actually
that.
can. Yes, it's actually been this revelatory thing for me recently.
I'm making a note right now to Google how to do that.
Yes, it is incredible. So now I can just kind of like click on this entire group of PDFs I have, the ones I have PDFs for. Thank you, Catalyst demo team rewards, and I just click them all and I kind of search them all, and then a lot of stuff pops up, and then it's a process of going through, kind of sifting out all the relevant stuff, opening up bigger panels for the stuff that is relevant, and it's just a lot of reading. This is why weekly episodes, again, were really, really difficult. Earlier on, 1999, 2000, 2001, all those really early episodes, there's no lore. There's nothing to do. It was just, everything that the first edition presents in the intro fic, and everything that the fifth edition thing presents in the intro fic, and that was easy. So I could pump those out week after week, and I did for like 5 or 6 weeks in a row. Easy. Now, 2060s, 2050s especially, there is just so much.
Right.
And so it is this overwhelming behemoth of trying to figure out what is worthy of going in, exactly how much do I say about this thing that needs to be said, how does this relate to this other thing. Sometimes there's things that take place over multiple years. Where does it go? I mean, it is just a lot of reading. So it's the hard way. I don't outsource it. It's just a lot of reading, but I get to take it year by year.
Right.
So
right.
that's the nice thing. And if I need to reference a previous year, actually, now that I've done it, it actually is a lot easier. I can just go back and look at my notes from the previous years, and I have this concise detail about what happened. And one of the things I try to do, and I don't know if people know this or not, or respect the fact that I do it. I hope they do. But I put things in there in the notes for earlier years that will have their payoff later. So if you're paying attention to something that's happening in 2077, if I know that something is going to affect that, I make sure that even if it wasn't relevant in 2050, I make sure to make a note of it in 2050. Just so that you can reference it from 2070, whatever.
Right. I have noticed that, and I think it lends credibility to the research that you've done, because so to give it a little background, and
that does make me happy too.
Well, I'm glad, because early on when I first started to decide I was going to make a Twitter presence for my Shadowrun stuff, I was doing every day I was doing a Today in Shadowrun History kind of thing.
Sure.
And so
that's fun. I like that.
Yeah, so I don't do it anymore, but for a while what I was doing is all I was doing was going to the Shadowrun timeline on the wiki, and I would just find out what was going on that day, if something was going, and if there were multiple things, I'd just pick something that was interesting and throw it up there, just to share with everybody. And at one point I would listen to your episodes, and I was wondering, well, does he just go to the wiki and just talk about what's on the timeline? And then I realized, no, there's no way that's the only, like, maybe that's a resource, but there's no way that's what he does, because he's referencing like, oh, well, this thing is happening, and guess what? There's a lot more that's going to happen in relation to this in like 5 years, and I'll get to it then. Stay tuned, like that kind of thing.
So there are a couple of things that I do. So you bring up the Shadowrun wiki. I wish, how do I say that? I wish we could pay somebody like a full-time salary just to do the Shadowrun wiki, because that would make my job incredibly easy.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm going to stop you for a second, because you just made me think of something. Early on when I was doing Diary of a Game Master episodes, I never got around to doing it, and I kind of feel bad for not, but I remember you said something maybe on your podcast, or maybe it was, I don't know. There was something that I heard that you were interested in pushing people. Maybe it was on Reddit or something. I don't know. On the forums.
Yeah,
you were like,
Twitter,
we need to get people like updating the wiki and really working on it, because I think you thought, like I did at the time, that it was kind of weak,
Yeah.
And I almost plugged that.
And I don't want to make it seem like the people who are updating it are doing a bad job.
No, not at all. But it's a monumental task.
Right. It's Herculean, and there is so much, and I don't blame anybody. There's no blame to go around.
Absolutely.
It's just that for the kind of game we have, the kind of universe we have, being impenetrable, like we talked about, the wiki could be a very fantastic resource for people who just go. The thing is, I think it stopped getting updated regularly and systematically around late 3rd edition.
Sure.
And so a lot of the 4th and 5th resources didn't make it in there, or if they did, they're not complete. Especially some of the characters and some of the corporations, you'll see a really good early history, and then it'll stop around the 2060s,
right.
And you'll kind of have to guess. But to your earlier point, I go to Sixth World Almanac. I get all of the things that says happened. I go to the wiki. I get all the things that says happened, and then I go back to all of the source books and kind of use those the skeleton of those other things to kind of hang things on, and then add things to them and rearrange them and kind of put them in a way that I think is a little bit more narrative than just listing off events.
Sure.
Although sometimes it just happens that way. If there's not a lot going on that year, it can just seem like here's some events.
Right.
But again, like we're planting seeds that will pay off in a couple of years, even a decade. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is a monumental task. I mean, to reference World of Warcraft, I think that's what made me so interested in thinking that the wiki needed to be kind of beefed up, is because I know, like I said, I use World of Warcraft as a reference because that's the only other like product in which I'm like deeply entrenched in the lore. But
sure.
They have such, I mean, the player base for that game is massive. So there are
like factors of 1 billion more than the people who would
no
be editing.
Kidding. So you take a tiny subset of people who are interested in the lore, and then a tiny subset of those that are passionately interested in keeping that updated on the internet, and you still have like thousands of people in World of Warcraft, right? So that's why that stuff is so rich.
Rapidly updating the wiki, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always stuff out there, and I always felt like, oh, I'd be playing the game and I'd run across this thing, and I'd be like, I want to know more about that, and I could just Google it or look it up on the wiki, and I would do the same thing when planning my runs in Shadowrun, and it was so hard to find information. So I am behind you. I think we need to raise maybe we need to get a Kickstarter going to pay somebody to spend a year of their life.
Nobody would benefit more than I would. So that's
yeah, right.
That's